Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
I'm with Amitav Ghosh, whose novel, The Gun Island, has just been released in Delhi. He's just been awarded the Gyanpith Award for English. Amitav, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
This one is, I think it's just come into the Indian market, so it's a really interesting story that starts in the Sundarbans and ends in Italy, in
Yes.
Venice. And you've drawn these connections between the two, brokered by chance, serendipity, and various other intuitions.
Yes. I was just going to say that we have to be careful not to give too much away in the sense of spoilers and so on. Yes, I mean, chance, serendipity, sort of interconnections and unlikely interconnections are very much a part of this book. Yes.
So tell me a little bit about it.
Well, this book, in a way, it began with, an old Bengali legend, which is that of Manasha Devi, the goddess of snakes, and Chand Saudagar, the merchant Chand, And there are many sort of epic poems in Bangla about, the relationship between Chand Saudagar and Manasha Devi. So we grew up with those stories, as a child, I heard those stories all the time. So in a way, those stories sort of found their way into this book. And I think in a way, those stories really were the beginning of this book.
Right.
Because actually one of the things that the stories do, I mean, they're so prescient in a certain way, is that what they present to you a conflict between the profit motive and other beings, of every kind. I mean, the whole natural world.
But what does that mean? So is this the story of the immigrants who go from poorer countries like ours, Bangladesh, India, the rest of the so-called third world, to the so-called first world, and upturning the sort of the civilizational journey of commerce and profit?
What happens is, really, I mean, those immigrants often are in circumstances where they have no options. Their options have really dwindled, especially in Bengal, especially in Bangladesh. People just have no other alternative. And it is true, really, that the sorts of things that are happening, especially on the Indian subcontinent, are driving a lot of people to take, to move.
But that's not your real story. I mean, or that's part of your story.
Yes.
The story of the emigration is just part of it. But what's the central thread of it?
I wouldn't say there's any one central thread. There are many threads.
Okay.
Yes, there are many threads. I mean, in fact, when I finished the book, I realized that so many of my interests and ideas and passions are actually invested in this book, and they've come together really in this book. I mean, migration is something I've been writing about forever.
Right.
Migration, dislocation, all those things have, that's a long-term interest of mine. In The Glass Palace, I write about it. In The Sea of Poppies, I write about it. But also, the natural world is something that I've been interested in for a very long time. The Sundarban is another thing I've been writing about. Etymologies.
and Italy and Venice. So the story of this gun merchant, which is a 16th century person who then travels and has all these wonderful journeys, comes together in this 20th century world, in a sense. So the world's collapse over 400 years.
Yeah, and that again is something that interests me so much, because one of my earliest books is called In an Antique Land.
Yes.
And it's about, it was a book that was published by Ravi Dayal. And it's about a merchant from North Africa who comes to India and then returns, actually taking an Indian with him. These journeys by merchants is something that interests me a lot.
Having said that, the whole, the refugees who have left, say, the Middle East or West Asia, as we call them, and moving towards Europe, there isn't that degree of volition or of personal responsibility. Or do you think there is? Because the stories that we hear is that, they leave behind terrible their cities have been devastated for reasons of war or famine or whatever. And therefore they're moving. So they're being forced to move in a sense.
It depends on what you mean by forced. You know, I mean, humans aren't just billiard balls, you know, who are sort of hit by a cue and thereby they're launched on a journey. So in Syria, for example, what happened? I mean, you know, there was a small change in German immigration laws, and because of cell phone technology, instantly this was made known to, you know, millions of people in the Middle East, and instantly they responded by moving. You know, so it's a number of different things that come together.
But movement is something that interests you. I mean, over the years, the books that you've written
Yes.
about, whether it's in the Glass Palace, and you like journeys. You started off, like you said, in an antique land, the journey of, you know, the Egypt-India journey, and then again in the trilogy. And this one as well, the Gun Island, is also about journeys. So what is it that entrances you about people?
Well, I suppose in part it's because I myself have been on a lot of journeys, you know. I mean, all my life I've been traveling, I suppose. And actually, long before me, my ancestors were making journeys, because in my family, the story goes that in 1856 there was a massive flood in East Bengal. My family is from East Bengal, from actually.
Which is now Bangladesh.
Yes.
Faridpur.
Bikrampur, actually.
Okay.
Yes. So you know, the village was submerged, and they started to move, and actually they moved to Bihar. You know, my father, etc., grew up in a small town called Chhapra.
I see.
In
No
Bihar.
longer so small, but.
Yes, nothing is small anymore.
Right.
So I suppose these things, you know, these dislocations, these journeys have played a very important part in my life, and I myself have spent many years traveling. I've spent many years abroad. So
words like refugee or have sort of negative connotations, don't they? You know,
Yes.
the distance between a refugee and a traveler is huge, and I'm not even going into tourist. But so how would you think of yourself as a writer?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I certainly wouldn't call myself a refugee, but it was interesting. You know, the climate has become very erratic in Bangladesh. So the rains are no longer predictable. There are sort of odd periods of drought, and you know, Bangladeshis are generally very well informed about climate change. You know, many of them would tell me about climate change.
Right.
And so I asked many of them. I said, would you call yourself a climate refugee, or would you call yourself an environmental refugee? But none of them would accept that. You know, they always denied that aspect of it.
No, so you know, even in your book, you talk about this Bengali man you meet in Venice, and you ask him about, and he says, "What's the difference between you and me? You come on a plane, and I come without a passport."
That's right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, there is no difference. I mean, that's the most striking thing about meeting and speaking with these migrants and refugees. One realizes that they're just the same as oneself.
So that's the story, the human drama that moves you as a writer, is it?
Certainly, yes.
And the story is important to tell.
Of course, I think it's the challenge of our times.
What is the story?
The story?
Yeah.
Well, it's the story of the world we live in.
Okay, and that's how you've told it.
Yes.
Okay, I think we'll have to stop here, Amitabh, because you know we don't want to give too many sort of stories away.
Sure.
But thank you so much for speaking to The Print.
Thank you. That was really a great pleasure. Thank you.
This is Jyoti Malhotra. Please continue to watch our YouTube channel. It's live and buzzing.